RDA, Building Supportive Communities, and at the RDAP Summit 2023. This is a Zoom webinar, so attendees are muted and your cameras are turned off. To ask a question, please use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. This session will run from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern, with the last 15 minutes of Q&A. And we have 2 live presentations followed by 2 pre-recorded lightning talks. You'll be able to ask questions of presenters both from live and recorded talks at the end of the session. Please, in the chat, indicate the presenter or presenters you would like to direct your question to, or sorry, in the Q&A, please indicate the presenter or presenters you would like to direct your question to, and we'll save all the questions until the end. You can also add more questions after the session is over and continue the conversation in the Whova chat connected with this session. The Research Data and Access and Preservation Summit organizers are committed to providing an environment where all attendees can participate fully in the program and the activities without fear of harassment or discriminatory behavior of any kind. There is a code of conduct helper available during this session. Their name is Emily Kilser. You may direct questions to them in Whova if you need assistance. And they can give you the code of conduct email address or the link to the incident report form if needed. So thank you very much. And first session we're going to have, or the first presentation we'll have today is with Andrea Pritt and Brianna Wham from Penn State University Libraries. And the title of their talk is Using Data Management to Explore and Engage with Our STEM Research Communities, Building a Shared Community of Data Terminology. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I will just open up to share my screen really quick. Let me move some Zoom things around. Thanks, everyone. I hope you can see the screen. Please do let me know if you can't. I appreciate everyone being here to listen to our talk. So as said, my name is Andrea Pritt. I am the STEM librarian at the Penn State Harrisburg Campus Library, and along with my colleague, Brianna Wham, she's the Research Data Management Librarian for STEM, also with Penn State University Libraries, but at a separate campus. So we're really excited to be here this morning or this afternoon with all of you to share one of our current research projects on building a shared community of research data management terminology. So here is, before we kind of dive into our results, and that's where we want to spend most of our time today, we did think it was important to share just a background of our Penn State University. For anyone here attending who's not familiar, we are a large R1 university, Carnegie ranked. We have 24 campuses across our Commonwealth, one of them being our virtual world campus, the rest physical. Our project, we were interested in studying STEM disciplines and graduate students and STEM researchers, so our faculty and postdoc researchers. Not all of our campuses have STEM graduate programs, so we surveyed the entire university, but there's more responses from our survey from fewer campuses, if that makes sense. So part of the project, we conducted a quantitative survey and then followed up with qualitative focus groups. And our goal with this project is we wanted to gain an understanding of research data management awareness and practices of these STEM researchers. And this would hopefully improve our research reproducibility and supporting open science across our university, as well as assisting the university libraries in finding new ways to support this group of researchers and, again, students. So our project, we looked at 4 big research questions. Today, we're only going to be discussing 2, the 2 here that you see in orange, numbers 3 and 4. And we're really interested in learning about terminology related to RDM, if librarians and science researchers from various disciplines, if we're using the same terminology, if others understand what our library jargon means and kind of how we see or how we would view and define these terms. And here briefly, again, I know I'm going through these pretty quickly. Our slides are archived in the Whova app as well as on OSF. So Here you can see survey participation by discipline. And at the bottom, you'll see the dark blue color is faculty. The gray is for postdoc responses. And that teal color you see are graduate students. Now, we focused our survey responses in 5 science disciplines that you'll see here. So biology and life sciences, computer science and data analytics, engineering and technology, math, and then physical sciences. And before we begin, before Brianna mentions our results and some of our data analysis, we wanted to share that we met with Penn State's literary informatics librarian. So Brianna and I are well-versed in kind of quantitative research. We were not well-versed in qualitative research or textual analysis at all. So we sought some additional help, and using the tool Voyant Tools, which is web-based, easy, free to use, that's how we really dove into our open-ended responses, our textual responses, to kind of help us answer our research questions. And I will pass it over to Brianna for more of our results.
Great, thanks, Andrea. So as Andrea mentioned, in the quantitative survey, we asked a few questions regarding vocabulary and how researchers are using or defining these terms. And so the first of these was, how do you define data management? And so for our analysis, we first looked at this overall, just looking for some top terms that are used in the definitions across all disciplines. And you can see here that there was about 55 terms used, and the top terms in this definition for data management were data, storage, storing, organizing or organization, management, and access, which are expected terms for these definitions. Next slide. And so next, we wanted to assess how often are researchers from different disciplines using terms librarians use to define data management. And so to do this, we selected a few common data management definitions, which are seen here on the left side of the slide, and extracted the major terms making up those definitions. Those are kind of the ones highlighted in orange. We then searched by discipline using Voyant Tools for those terms in our researcher responses. So as you can see, we use truncated search terms for words such as find, understand, lose or loss, documentation, organization, security, storage, sharing, reuse, and access. Next slide. And here you can see how often those terms were used by researchers from the 5 disciplines that we explored. On the x-axis, you'll see search terms with bars representing the different disciplines. So those different colored bars are each of our different disciplines. On the y-axis, or you'll see the bar is the percent presence of that term within that discipline. So for example, in responses from biology and life sciences researchers, the term organ, or for organization, was presented 26 times, and there were 61 biology and life sciences responses. So you'll see 43% represented here. Overall, it's apparent that researchers across the disciplines tend to use terms like organize and storage, but did not include find, understand, loss, document, secure, share, or reuse very frequently. Next slide. Additionally, we did look for reference of terms such as I don't know or similar sentiments in the responses to assess the percent within each discipline that express not knowing how to define this term. And so while these numbers were relatively low for this question, the most were in mathematics, with 4 out of 22, mentioning that they did not know how to define data management. We do want to note, though, that mathematics also has the smallest sample size, so this distinction cannot be taken too strongly. Next slide. So we similarly did this for our second vocabulary-based question, where we asked what are metadata. And similarly here, you can see our top terms were data, information, metadata, describes, and collected. And following the same analysis we did for data management, next slide, we additionally selected some common definitions for metadata, as you can see here on the left, and extracted kind of major terms from within those definitions, as you can see on the right, and then looked for those terms within the definitions of researchers within our data set. And if we look at the results from that on the next slide, we can see that it's apparent that researchers across disciplines most often use the term inform, which is with this frequently referring to information, but rarely use the numerous other terms included in our example definitions. And next slide. And we similarly did look for that I don't know sentiment with this question as well. And there were many more responses suggesting they did not know how to define metadata, emphasizing the importance of clarifying what is meant by metadata when working with researchers. Now I'll pass it back to Andrea.
Thanks, Brianna. So some of that may not be surprising to any of our data librarians or science librarians here, but we wanted to mention a few of these insights from the previous slide and group them here just in a slide all together. So as you saw, the top term for both questions is data, which is not really helpful. Have been looking at, are they responding to metadata are, or data management is, that type of thing. So we'll need to, as we further this research, kind of dig into that a bit more. And as Brianna mentioned, we had lots of I don't know or I'm not sure, which we were expecting, though there was one response from all of our responses where they noted, I don't really use data. So we need to pick that kind of apart and see what discipline that's coming from. We geared our survey and focus groups primarily towards STEM disciplines. So we're assuming that most of them are using data, which is clear. So that'll be something we need to look at as well. And again, we've kind of learned that outreach with our STEM researchers needs to account for this terminology, these differences and nuances. Brianna and I are part of a group of librarians here at Penn State who provide outreach to a wide variety of patrons, whether it's students, faculty, researchers, community members. So it's clear that we need to increase our efforts in this area a bit more. This will provide a better base knowledge and general understanding for these terms, again, not only for librarians, but also all of the patrons that we serve at Penn State. And as far as future textual analysis that we'd like to do, we want to take a deeper look at these differences. And what you can see here on this screen, if anyone here has not seen or used Voyant tools, we have quick screenshots. And what you can do in this tool is you upload your data files, whatever that is. And then what you can actually do is look at what are the words or the sentence, to the left of a word and to the right of a word. And so this, as we kind of dig deeper, and we're hoping to write a research article about this so that we can share this more broadly too. You can see on the left-hand side or on both screenshots, we've just selected the term metadata. So on the left, you can say, the first person that's responded here, I did not hear about metadata. On the right, you can see metadata is the data summarizing, basic, and then kind of you can pick and choose which responses you really want to look at. So this is an idea and a future goal for us. And then additionally, again, I've sort of alluded to this, as did Brianna. We want to take a deeper look at these differences between the disciplines to find, maybe a broader context of these terms. We would love to analyze new root words, things about our STEM researchers and grad students recognizing that their data has value, or that it's important to preserve their data for the future. Security, of course, is a big issue and a concern for us within the libraries, as well as our IT department, who helps with our cloud storage and our cloud computing. And again, ultimately, our plan is to kind of pull all of this into some published research articles that, again, we can share more information more broadly. So please stay tuned for that. And I believe we'll be holding questions for the end. So we welcome any questions that you have. And that is it for us. So I will stop my share now. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You're muted, Linda.
Sorry. There we go. Thank you so much. I was saying I have questions for you at the end, and I'm very excited about your project. Feel free, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A as we go. Up next, we have Jess Newman McDonald from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. And the title of their talk is, So Tell Me About Yourself, Building Community Through Data Interviews. Thank you very much, Jess.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and make sure I got my screens organized. Please do let me know if you're not seeing them. So good afternoon, good morning. I'm Jess New-McDonald, Research Data and Scholarly Communications Lead at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. And today we're going to take a quick research data services journey and make some friends along the way. So without further ado, let's get going. Here's a quick outline of what we're going to take a look at today. We're going to start with some player introductions and meet the UTHSC stakeholders in our RDS or Research Data Services space. I'll touch on the history of RDS and our health sciences library between 2017 up to present. Our main quest is going to be a series of data interviews I conducted as part of an environmental scan, what we've learned from those so far, and the unexpected partnerships we forged along the way. And then we'll preview what I will refer to as level 2, our newly formed library data services team. So I know this slide has a lot of information going on it, but what you're looking at is on the left, you'll see our player lineup. These are the major stakeholders that emerged in the research data support services space from the environmental scan. And then on the right is a modified version of Harvard's biomedical data lifecycle, highlighting key research data lifecycle activities and UTHSC players that generally support that area. So to walk you through first our lineup, we have the TNCTSI, which is our Tennessee Clinical and Translational Science Institute, which primarily provides training and continuing education on topics such as research design and qualitative methods. We have our Baird Clinic, which stands for Biostats, Epidemiology, and Research Design. They offer a fee-based consultation and statistical analysis service. Our Information Technology Office, I know we all have one, primarily is working in technological solutions such as large data storage and secure data transfer. Our Research Office, which assists with workflow of grant funding and those related administrative tasks. And then the Health Sciences Library. And then as you can see, our library currently support primarily resides over here in the left half of that circle, as designated by the orange wedges. Those sections are evaluate and archive, share and disseminate, and then access and reuse. The orange stripe sections, which kind of appear from, let's say 11 o'clock down to 4, are areas identified as opportunities for growth, including data management plans, which we have started supporting with instruction on the DMP tool and feedback on draft plans, as well as documentation and metadata support and all of the collect and create categories, which we propose doing in collaboration with the Baird Clinic and ITS. So to set the stage for this quest, we need to know the history of RDS in the library. It's not a long history as we are relatively new to tackling data support, but it began in earnest in 2017, which was before my time by a year, when we conducted a scan of research data management activities on campus and identified 4 groups working in the data management specifically area. Those groups were the Baird Clinic, the Center for Biomedical Informatics, our IT group, and the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, which is part of our Office of Research. They were primarily assisting with secure data storage and transfer, and then data cleaning and analysis. But rather than kind of true support units as the library might think of them, these groups functioned as cores almost. So that might be a health science thing primarily, but a core, an institutional core, where they would help with some of these services in either a fee-based or co-investigator sort of role. So they were receiving something for their support. And then where organization and management practices were concerned, it was only with regards to institutional data, not research data. And because of this gap in both services and scope, the library saw a strong case for moving more into the RDS space. In 2018, I became the inaugural Assessment and Scholarly Communications Librarian, which was a reimagined position that included oversight of the library's contribution to RDM, which first started with defining what that might be. And then in early 2020, our second RDS position was approved. That quickly fell victim to a hiring freeze due to the pandemic, as you might expect. And then in spring of 2022, an IT colleague looped me into a conversation with a group of our preventive medicine faculty that were asking IT to build them a data repository. Simple request, right? So more on that in a minute, but it's a great example of how needs tended to get met or go unmet at UTHSC. And then around this time, we also reposted and luckily filled our assessment and research data librarian faculty position with my colleague, Sarah Newell. Luckily, she was willing to jump right into the midst of things because they were already moving pretty quickly when she joined us. And then in the summer of 2022, my data interview project began informally at first. These interviews were conducted with UTHSC researchers and aimed to further assess RDM needs. I pretty quickly realized the importance of what was coming out of these conversations and formalized the project into an IRB approved study. It really can't be overstated how big of a catalyst the NIH data management and sharing policy and its impending launch date of January 2023 were for motivating our RDS activities. It was really the kick in the pants we needed after several years of pandemic-fueled kind of disorganization and adjustment to really get this project moving. So in response to the repository request from our PresMed group that I just mentioned, our archivist and I conducted an evaluation of our digital commons repository and came to the conclusion that it wasn't a viable option at this time, in no small part because of the personnel and expertise it would require to manage. We began working with IT to evaluate other storage and sharing options and prepare to offer a consultation-based service for researchers on selecting an appropriate repository for their data. We also began a concerted effort to really educate ourselves on the characteristics and requirements of the policy. Luckily, many groups, including RDAP, were putting out great content and resources during that time. And we quickly ended up establishing ourselves as the most knowledgeable source on campus about the policy, which was a bit surprising, and maybe that's a little bit of imposter syndrome, but in collaboration with our TNCTSI group, we delivered an instructional session on the new policy that was attended by over 150 researchers in January. We now act as a primary reference point for policy questions. And that leads us kind of into our next big question that aside from being policy experts on this one specific thing, how else could the library support research data management needs on campus? So it came time for some strategizing on our part about which path we should take into the, at times, organizationally treacherous cave of UTHSC research data support services. On the one hand, we could approach our role with what I was calling a beginner's mind, leading with a curiosity and open to learning from the perspectives and experiences of others. Or we could step into the current gap and further establish ourselves as experts, seizing on that opportunity to coordinate and centralize our currently very ad hoc service environment on campus. One thing I do feel compelled to warn you about is that this was and still is very new to us. And the existing gaps between support units, both in terms of the collaboration that was happening and the services they were offering, were pretty large. So as examples like our PresMed faculty wanting IT to build them a data repository highlight, our institution is a pretty siloed space, and our researchers are accustomed to patching together support from wherever they can find it. Often that results in duplicated efforts and kind of one-off solutions that are difficult to scale or expand upon. So in truth, there's not necessarily a correct answer here, and it's a bit of a false dichotomy, but both could work depending on organizational culture and available resources, including personnel and expertise. So your mileage may vary, but for us, the correct answer was that beginner's mind approach, which is having an attitude of openness and eagerness and a lack of preconceptions. We set out to learn more and facilitate relationships by displaying interest in the work and experiences of existing groups, and then openly sharing back the discoveries with them as they emerge. So this has been a very iterative, open, kind of discursive process. With establishing expertise, we ran the risk of positioning ourselves as the authority rather than partners, and would have continued potentially the fracturing of efforts in our already very siloed environment. And honestly, since we aren't truly experts yet, and we aren't resourced enough to act as such, any failure would just probably reaffirm the proclivities of our colleges to each do their own thing. So our library RDS team, which is currently only 2 people, one of whom is in their first professional position, just wasn't really equipped yet to do that and step into that space. So we decided it made much more sense to offer services and support as we were able to, rather than to run the risk of biting off more than we could chew. And onto our main quest, the data interviews. These were semi-structured and lasted about an hour. They were modified from a series of data interview reference questions from a citation that I've got linked there. And then all interviews were conducted and recorded with permission via Zoom and then transcribed for analysis. So far I've spoken with 10 researchers from all of our colleges except dentistry. And then we have 15 more lined up to follow up and further enhance this project. These researchers conduct a mix of qualitative, scientific modeling, clinical, and basic science research. So they're fairly well representative of the work that's done here at UTHSC. And currently we are coding these interviews, but I do have some major themes that have emerged quite readily just from kind of our rough coding and initial readings of these. So I've broken these down into desires, fears, and motivations when it comes specifically to the topic of data sharing. So our researchers desire some centralized campus guidance and resources for data sharing and research data management. That's pretty evident and something we're working towards. I'm hopeful that our strategic plan will help further this goal. So we're currently working simultaneously on a strategic plan. More tech solutions that don't require specialized training. Data enclaves came up quite frequently as a solution and a space to work with large data sets without having to download the data to your own machine for analysis. And then continued education and instruction on data science topics such as data harvesting and cleaning. They feared being scooped on their intellectual property. For example, that someone else would use their data before they'd gotten all the publications they wanted to out of that data set. They were fearful that their data contained errors and would invite criticism or potentially do reputational harm. So if they weren't setting it up for sharing at the front end, that data quality might not be what they wanted it to be before they put it out there. They feared the legal and ethical repercussions of sharing protected or human subject data. And they feared relinquishing control or no longer being the primary stewards of their data, the people with the authority to decide who uses it and for what purposes. And probably is no surprise, they're motivated by receiving proper credit and measures of research impact, such as citations and alt metrics. And then sometimes surprisingly by societal good. So this belief that sharing their data are helping to further science and better the human condition. So I frame this as an abundance versus scarcity mindset. We kind of had people that were very fearful of being scoots, wanted to hold everything very close to the chest, and then some that were very open and saw the larger good of sharing their data. So I've hinted at this along the way, but one of the most important and unanticipated outcomes of this project was the creation of an informal community of practice around assessing, improving, and delivering research data services. The nature of those conversations and the snowball method of participant selection served to position the library as an impartial and engaged stakeholder for coordinated growth as an institution. As I kind of mentioned earlier, it helps that this year we're also in the process of onboarding a new chancellor and creating a new strategic plan as a campus. So many folks are already thinking about our research needs and what we need to do to fill in some of these gaps we've identified. The interviews put us in touch with a variety of different people with other units, or when other units heard about these interviews, they were pretty excited to learn more. The shared interest helped position the library within the campus conversation around research and research data specifically. And then these are a few of the collaborative highlights with our stakeholders that have happened so far as a result of these interviews. I did present the initial findings to our Chief Information Officer. He was super interested in using that for his portion of the strategic plan. And then I was invited to join the IT research group, which is ongoing and meets monthly. With the TNCTSI, as I mentioned, we had kind of data management sharing plan policy 101 sort of presentation. Office of Research, we're working on collaborative reference referrals. So we kind of go back and forth. They send people our way pretty frequently. And then we have plans for a data resources task force once we get the new head of that department in place. And then just some other kind of stuff. All interviewees were eager to help improve RDS and spoke positively about the library, which was nice. I spoke at the Faculty Senate meeting and a few various college meetings about the policy. And then I am currently helping to inform the campus strategic plan. And this was just a quick note I received from our CIO, Dan Harder, back in January, a few days before the NIH policy went into effect and everyone was all abuzz. It's simple, but I think it does serve to show how well our efforts worked to get us included in the conversation, where historically the library here has been seen as pretty traditionally a space for students to study and or a source of database subscriptions. So he was just saying, people recognize that we put a lot of work into helping out with the policy, and we're now recognized as a resource for that on campus. And then currently we have formally started referring to our 2-person team as the Library Data Services team. The bulk of our work so far has been in supporting researchers using the DMP tool and offering a DMP feedback service. And then we also receive a few questions a week, I would say, about the policy itself, although that's tapering off, I think, as this funding cycle kind of comes to an end. We hope to start offering some workshops on locating and evaluating data for reuse and some basic data wrangling, primarily for a student audience. Those were 2 needs that also emerged from our interviews, including the including concerns over the lack of instruction for students hoping to work with existing data in their own research. So we've got a few sources of existing data that students frequently use, and there's not a whole lot of instruction about even how to use that or what to do with it once you're finished. And that is kind of where we are. So thank you for going on that journey with me. And there's my email if you have any questions after this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tess. Those are obviously very amazing signs. So fun to see the game thing. Thank you so much. All right. So next we have one of our lightning talks. This is going to be Joanna Thielens, who's from the University of Michigan, and it's called From Flying Solo to Being One of the Flock, Lessons Learned on How the Data Professional Community Can Support Each Other's Data Work.
And I'll be playing a video with both lightning talks back to back. So if it doesn't work, let me know.
And the second one, then I'll go ahead. The second one is Shannon Sheridan from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and Brianna Ezra Wham from the Pennsylvania State Library, the Pennsylvania State University. And their talk is called Using a Podcast to Engage the Data Professional Community. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joanna Thielen, and I'm the Data Curation Specialist for Science and Engineering at the University of Michigan. Today, I'm going to be presenting my lightning talk called From Flying Solo to Being One of the Flock, Lessons Learned on How the Data Professional Community Can Support Each Other's Data Work. When I first became a data librarian, I was flying solo. I was at an R3 institution that had a small but mighty staff of about 50 people in the academic library. My job title was Science and Data Librarian. I was hired as a data librarian and then given liaison responsibilities for 3 different science departments. This was a new position, and data services were new to the academic library and the campus. So the first thing I did to try to start these services was to look to professional organizations and the literature to learn how others had done something similar. I knew that others had done this in other academic libraries, and I didn't want to recreate the wheel at my institution. But unfortunately, I found that little that was available online was applicable to me. The vast majority of the literature and the information shared was from very large institutions that had much, much more capacity than I had as a data librarian with liaison responsibilities. So I wasn't able to reuse much of what was available just because it simply did not scale down to the capacity that I had. Now in my new position, I am one of a flock of 3 people who provide data services at our academic library. I work at an R1 institution with a very well-funded library that has over 400 employees. My job title now is Data Curation Specialist for Science and Engineering. So I no longer have liaison responsibilities, and I have the privilege of focusing on several disciplines instead of all of them. So my first experience at a data librarian has really shaped how I think about sharing information related to what we have done in our data services area with the data professional community. So that made me wonder, are we really walking the walk with our own data and information sharing? This is something we talk about with our patrons probably on a daily basis, but are we really doing it with our own work? And I think the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. So I proposed this lightning talk as a way to provide some concrete examples and to start a conversation in this area. So one way I think that we can improve in this area is to not only continue sharing out like we've been doing about our own data services, but also think about the end user in mind and writing for our data professional community. I like to think of this in terms of the reduce, reuse, or recycle metaphor that is often talked about in the sustainability area. So how can someone reduce, reuse, or recycle my work? So for example, if you're presenting a case study of presenting workshops at your university, what sort of lessons learned or transferable to other institutions? Are there things that aren't transferable? How could this initiative or service be made bigger, smaller, or modified for other disciplines or audiences? What went well or not so well? So kind of this meta thinking so that you can pass along this knowledge to other data professionals in our community. We can also do a better job of applying the FAIR principles to our own work. Many of us think about the FAIR principles on a daily basis in relation to our patrons, but it's also applicable to the sharing of our own work. So I've listed a few, definitely not an exhaustive list here, of a few ways that I think we could apply the FAIR principles to our own information sharing. So for example, which is interoperable. If you're sharing handouts for a workshop you did, try to share them in editable formats. So something like a Word document instead of a PDF. Obviously, Word as a proprietary format has its own issues, but this would allow other people to edit those handouts as opposed to having to create something on their own. Along those same lines with R reusable, you can include licensing information on that handout so others know exactly how they can and cannot reuse the handout that you've made publicly available. So I hope this has kind of spurred a few ideas for yourself and for your own work, and I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brianna Wham from Penn State University Libraries, and I'm joined by my co-presenter and co-host, Shannon Sheridan from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. We're here today to talk to you about using a podcast to engage the data professional community. Engaging with researchers is a key component of promoting good research data management, and successful engagement activities have strong potential for much wider reaching impact if they can be adapted at other institutions. However, there are two potential hurdles to this adoption. Data professionals don't always publish full papers detailing implementation aspects of their outreach and engagement initiatives. And even when they do, other data professionals don't always have the time to monitor and read the literature. And so the IDEA podcast was born.
IDEA, or Improving Data Engagement and Advocacy, grew out of a Research Data Alliance interest group, engaging researchers with data. We feature interviews with data professionals who are engaging their researchers in novel ways, as well as reviewing new literature to highlight the impressive work that is happening in this space. Episodes are released once a month, alternating between interviews and publication reviews.
And before we could start recording our first episode, we had a lot of research to do. We looked at other data podcasts or podcasts that had similar academic themes but were not data related to see what sort of content did well and what did we personally like as listeners. We also had a lot of decisions to make, like the name of the show, our target audience, how frequently we would publish, and a general structure for the different episodes. Deciding on a publishing platform also took some research. We needed something free and didn't want ads on our show. So we chose Anchor from Spotify as our platform. We also made sure to syndicate out to a variety of other podcast platforms where users could access the show once they were published, like Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts.
We identify interviewees for the podcast in a variety of ways. Sometimes they are recommended to us by other colleagues. Sometimes we see interesting talks at conferences and want to learn more. And sometimes we encounter their work in other venues and want to help amplify it by having them on the show. It doesn't take much effort to be interviewed by us. At least we think so. We schedule an hour-long block with our interviewees and send them a brief survey that helps us get biographical details for the show notes. We try to provide thorough documentation before the interview. After all, for many, this is their first time being interviewed on a podcast. So we like to prepare them with a what to expect document.
And then we record. We have a few set questions that we ask to make sure we're getting the most relevant information for our listeners, but we also make sure to leave space and time for us and our guests to go off on interesting tangents. The conversations are always fun and interesting, and we really appreciate people being willing to come and talk to us. For articles, they're identified on a much more of an ad hoc basis. Generally, we look for current articles that highlight researcher engagement, but that's about where our requirements end. We both read the articles and co-write a synopsis. We also choose a few highlights to dwell on. For technology, we simply record using Zoom and use the audio file. Neither of us have bought specific podcasting microphones, and so if you've listened to the podcast and think that we should change that, please let us know.
Once the audio is recorded, it's time for editing. We didn't want to have to pay for a program, and Audacity was one of the few free audio editing programs out there. While we both have access to the program, we can't co-edit the file. So the strategy is that we take turns doing a first pass editing the episode. We then send it to the other person who does a final review. In general, we spend no more than 3 to 4 hours editing. While the episode is being edited, we also collate show notes. These generally aren't long or complicated. If it's an interview, we go through the biographic information our guests have provided and include relevant links. If we discuss other resources during the show, we try to include them as well. Then we're ready to publish.
Thank you everyone for watching our presentation today. If you do have any questions, thoughts for guests you'd like to hear on the show, or you yourself are interested in talking about an engagement project that you're working on, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our contact information is shared here on the slide.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we are close to our time unless there's any last questions, but I just want to say thank you so much to our participants and to our audience for asking great questions and participating in this session. This was fantastic. We will have a short break until 1:15, and note that there will be a new Zoom link for the next session, and that will be on the Whova agenda. And you can continue asking questions on the Whova chat for this session, which Jess, I have a question for you, so I'll put that in there. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody.
I think it's the same. I think this Zoom room will
stay
open. This room will stay open. There will also be another concurrent thing happening.
So ignore what I just said. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.